guys, so we're back again talking about ellipses. This time we're going to do ellipses in 2-point perspective so that you can actually understand the technical perspective behind how ellipses look. But don't forget that I've got the video on shortcuts or quick tips for freehand ellipses. That's going to help you a little bit more with understanding how an ellipse really is supposed to look in space when you're drawing it without this guide. But this is going to be the technical guide so that you can actually understand the theory behind it, so that when you do a freehand ellipse, it's going to be much better. So we're going to take a look at the cube. We're going to take a look at the 2-point perspective cube that I drew. So you're also going to want to watch the video on 2-point perspective, the theory of 2-point perspective, so you can draw that cube and have that prepped for when you watch this one. And then we're going to apply the ellipses to that 2-point perspective cube. So let's take a look at the page. Okay, here I've got one of the ellipses drawn in 2-point perspective for you. I'm sorry, one of the cubes drawn in 2-point perspective for you. And I've drawn my ellipses at the top and the bottom. I'm using colored pencils so that you can all understand the different steps. And so I'm going to do that again when I draw one for you. And then we'll actually connect it to make a cylinder, so that if you were wanting to make something like a tire or a cup or a bowl, something like that, you're going to be able to do that. So I'm going to set that aside. Here I've got my 2-point perspective cube that's already drawn for you. Remember, you want to look at the video on the theory of 2-point perspective so that you can get this set up ahead of time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take, excuse me, we're going to take a look at how that works. So the first step is that I'm going to draw a line, these red lines that are basically like an X that marks the spot. It goes from the front corner to the back corner and the side corner to the side corner. So that's these two corners. And what that does is that marks the visual center of the top plane of the cube. Remember that this is the visual center when we're looking at it moving back in space. It's not the mathematical center. So we can't do this with math at all. We've got to do it by arriving at that middle point by creating these two lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is line up my ruler. I'm going to account for the fact that sometimes my colored pencils are a little bit thicker than my regular pencils, so I need to leave a little bit of a space for them so that my corner to corner line really touches both corners. And the side to side corner, I think that's a little bit easier to see. When we start looking at the front to the back corner, it's a little bit confusing because it also is going to mimic or be very similar to the top back corner to the bottom back corner. So you want to make sure that you can draw a line that's basically occupying the same space potentially, because I've made that my cube centered between my two vanishing points. But you're going to see that it actually stops shorter. So I'm going to line up my ruler here. And I'm going to go from the front corner to the back corner. And now I have this X that marks the very center of the top plane of my cube. Now remember that this is the visual center. It's not the mathematical center. If I were to measure the distance from here to here, it would be longer than the distance from here to here. And that's because in perspective, remember in my tips for perspective, the first tip is that things that are closer to you appear larger. So this triangle of the top part of my plane is going to look bigger than these two triangles. And it's going to look bigger than this triangle as well, because this one and these two look closer than this one does. So as I move back in space, it's going to appear smaller. Actually, a better way to say it, and because I actually just said something a little bit off, these two are going to be equal because they're farther back. So this front half, it's not really the half, is going to be a larger portion than this back half. And that's because this point is closer to us than that back corner is. So as things move back in space, they appear smaller. Okay, now that I've found the visual center, I'm going to connect that visual center to both of my vanishing points. So both to vanishing point 1 and to vanishing point 2. Okay, the way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to switch to my blue pencil, and I've got to use my long ruler now. So I'm going to connect the visual center to the vanishing point. Let me get that lined up nice and perfectly. And really what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the front edge through the visual center to the back edge, and then I'm going to do a dashed line connecting it to the vanishing point so that I know that it's lined up. But all I really need is I need to mark the front edge to the back edge, and then I just want to ensure that it's connected here. And then I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. So I'm going to line it up with the vanishing point, with the visual center, accounting for the space. Now I know sometimes I lean way over and you can see the top of my head, but that's how I make sure that I'm doing my work properly, is that I oftentimes am leaning really close to my page. So now let's adjust that a little bit more. I'm going to go from the front edge through the visual center to the back edge of that top plane, and then a dashed line to make sure that everything's connecting the way that I want it to. And now what I've done, you can see my little goof where I put it in a little bit too close. It's hard to erase your colored lines. Now what I've got is I have the visual center of the top plane, and I have the visual center of each edge of that plane. So my ellipse will touch this point, this point, this point, and this point, because my ellipse is going to touch the visual center of each edge of that top plane. You can see my example here. I've got a little clear ellipse glued in here, and it's touching these 2 points and these 2 points, but it's not going to touch the corners. So we have one more step for our red lines to be able to show where our ellipse is going to touch from the visual center to the outside corners. And the way that we're going to do that is that we're going to divide each segment of the line from the center to the corner into thirds. So for example, from the center to this corner, I'm going to do approximate thirds as best as I can. From the center to the other corner, the right corner, I'm going to do approximate thirds as best as I can. Those two will be similar because they're existing on the same plane and distance back in space. However, the front to the center and then the center to the back corner, those will be different. So, and oftentimes I need to turn my page so that I can see those a little bit clearer. There are my thirds there, and here are my thirds on the back side. So you can see that this back corner, those thirds are smaller. These are medium-sized thirds. And then the side to side and side to side thirds are going to be your biggest. Now my ellipse is going to touch these 4 outer points that are the middle of each edge of the plane, and my ellipse will touch the 2/3 from the center point, the 2/3 from the center point, the 2/3 from the center point, and the 2/3 from the center point. So that gives me a loose guide. Now here's the tricky part. Sometimes people have a really hard time working on getting those ellipses to look correct. Remember my tips in the quick tips for ellipses. You want to shave off dents and puff up. I said that wrong. You want to shave off bumps and puff up dents. So let's take a look at that here again. And I might wind up leaning my head over so you guys can't see. I'm going to try to keep my noggin out of the way so that you all can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to do slight curves between each section. Notice that I turned my page because that makes it easier. The other thing you want to pay attention to, and I probably need to get a little bit of a darker pencil so that you guys can see this, so I'll reach over in a second and grab one. Within each section, I'm only grazing by the point. I'm not going to be touching the side of the plane of the cube from one spot to another. It's just going to be grazing in this point. So if it gets too big, it's going to look like, you know, almost like a balloon. If you were to blow up a balloon inside of this box, it would start to get fatter and fatter until it started to look square. You want these sections to be nice and curved, or they're going to look a little bit too chunky and segmented. So there's my first go. Let me grab another pencil. I'm going to reach over here, and I think I'm going to go for, let's go for a 3B because I have one that's sharpened, and then you're going to be able to see it a lot better. I'm going to make some adjustments. This side looks a little bit dented to me, and this one does too. So you can see with my darker pencil, you can probably see this ellipse emerging a little bit more. And here I definitely need to puff that up. That's a dent. So you can see that it takes a little bit of finessing. I don't usually get this perfectly the first time around. I usually have to do a couple of versions. And then I can take my Tough Stuff and erase some of the thickness of the line if I need to, in order to make it look nice and rounded. Okay, so let's repeat that again just so that you guys get the steps again. We're gonna do the same ellipse on the bottom. You're actually gonna notice that the top ellipse is different than the bottom of the cube where I put my ellipse, and that's because as things move away and down from my horizon line, my view of it is going to change. The same would be true if I were to be looking at a cube upside down. The one that's closer to the horizon line is going to look narrower. The plane that's farther away from the horizon line will look a little bit bigger. So let's create that bottom one, just so that you can go over those steps again. I'm going to try to get some of these tools out of my way. So let's go back to the 3B so that way you guys can see it. Oh wait, I need my red pencil actually. So I'm going to do a corner to corner line from side to side, and then my corner to corner line from front to back. This might happen to overlap. This one sometimes overlaps this front line right here on the cube, and that's because we've collapsed everything in space, but they're not actually overlapping. Don't be concerned if this gets a little bit confusing. Also, don't be concerned if it looks a little bit diagonal compared to the other one. My lines are all just adjusted slightly with human error, so you know, I might not have a perfect cube. I'm not a computer. So now I've got my corner to corner line that marks the X. That's the center of it's the visual center of the plane. Again, not to be confused with the mathematical center. If I measured this half of the cube, it would look much larger than this half of the cube. So once I have that visual center, I can connect that to my vanishing points. And again, I'm going to draw from the front to the back of the entire plane. A lot of times this gets missed by students. They'll connect from here back and go back to the vanishing point, but they won't connect from the visual center forward. So make sure you get this segment in there too. Otherwise you're going to get confused. I'm going to do my dashed line just to make sure that it connects. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Okay, so now I have the 4 points on the edges of the ellipse where my the edges of the cube where my ellipse will touch. I keep jumbling my words today. It's not even Monday. Then I'm going to divide from the center to the outer corners with thirds. So there's 2/3. And then again, I like to turn my page to see from the center to the front so that I can actually make sure that it really is thirds. And notice that these thirds are larger because the whole plane is larger than the top plane. And now I'm going to connect from the visual center of each edge of the plane to the 2/3 point from the middle. And I always give it a first go round, and then I have to puff up my dents and shave off my bumps. Otherwise it can look like it's a really segmented ellipse and it doesn't look curvy. And sometimes my thirds aren't perfectly in the right spot. So this one definitely needs to be puffed up a little bit. I need a bigger curve in the middle of that segment and in the middle of this segment so that those really look nice and rounded. So you can see sometimes it takes me multiple attempts in order to really get the nicest shape. And then I can always take my tough stuff and just erase right in there. So that I keep the correct line. So another thing when you're using these brushes, a lot of times I have my students and they go like this. And keep in mind when you're doing that, that much friction on your page is going to smear everything too. So you just want to brush it once or twice. And if you can't get those off with the brush, then you might have to pick them off by hand. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. So there, I've got a nice shaped ellipse on the bottom. Now we've got to check and see. And you can see here where my 2/3 was, I actually had to go a little bit above that to make that look nice and curved. So your marks that you're aiming for are just approximate marks. You might have to change that a little bit in order to make the best looking ellipse possible. And now in theory, this point should connect to this point. This point should connect to this point, this one, and these two. But it could go all the way around. You could connect any point. I'm going to go for the sides. Now you can see that when I put a vertical line in, and sometimes it's easier for me to see a true vertical with this ruler with a grid. They're a little bit off. I think this one probably needs to squeeze out just a little tiny bit more into the corner. And that's going to make it about the same size as the outer edge. Hopefully I didn't make it too big. Sometimes that's my correction, is that I'll go from too small to too big. And then I can put in a vertical line that connects those two to make my cylinder. And then I'm going to look for the same on this side to this side. Again, I want to check my ruler to make sure that it's nice and vertical. And it looks like I have a little bit of the same problem on that side, so I'm going to squeeze this one out just a hair more. A lot of times these are really hairline adjustments, and they're called hairline because they're about as thick as a hair. It's a tiny little adjustment that will make everything look better. And that to me looks like it lines up. Whoops, I went too far. Okay, so now there you've got your two ellipses on two separate planes, and you've made it into a cylinder. This will help you a lot when you're doing bowls. And then remember, make sure that you look at the video that I have on the theory of two-point perspective, and then also freehand ellipses. That will sort of tie everything together so that you can do all of this step by step. I know this is going to help a lot. I know that ellipses are really tough for most of my students, so if you're wanting to do a still life, any cups, bowls, bottles, vases, things like that, this will help a ton. And then it's also going to help for things like bicycles, car wheels, other cool stuff that you might want to draw, cameras, anything that you might have a circle in that's moving back in space. So I hope this is a really helpful tool for you guys, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you all so much for watching. More videos are coming soon, so if you wish to subscribe to my channel, go ahead and do that. And also you can check out my website, lzmstudio.com.